Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of In Conversation. Good morning to viewers in the United States of America, good afternoon to viewers in the UK, and good evening to viewers in Asia and elsewhere. In this episode of In Conversation, I'm joined by Mahvash Siddiqui, a veteran American diplomat whose career has spanned diplomacy, national security, public policy, and international affairs. She's been a Chargé d'Affaires, which is a kind of ambassador for a country in where was it?
So I was handpicked and selected by the Trump administration to go to Tonga as the acting
Tonga,
ambassador, right?
and
Which is the Pacific Islands, 28 hours away from the United States.
yeah, and she's written about immigration policy and H-1B visa program, and the most debated and consequential aspects of American immigration system. Together, what we're going to do is we're going to explore the H-1B visa program and how this has been exploited and whether it's fulfilling its original purpose, and arguments made by both supporters and also critics. So I'm going to first ask Mahvash to say hello to everyone, and then to say a little bit about herself. So Mahvash Siddiqui, welcome to In Conversation.
Thank you so much, Paul. It's such a privilege and an honor to be here. Basically, I'm from in Southern California, 50 miles away from the FIFA epicenter. So really, delighted to be here in California, but also talking to you. London's one of my favorite places in the world. So thank you for having me on this podcast. Looking forward to having a good conversation on H-1Bs and beyond.
You're most welcome. So would you like to, for viewers who may not know you, would you like to say a little bit about your background and what first drew you into diplomacy?
Absolutely. So I joined the Department of State in 2004. Essentially, Madeleine Albright and Colin Powell had each come to California to, seek people from the West Coast. The Department of State is very East Coast heavy, and people from California and the Midwest are very lightly represented. So I took the very difficult foreign service exams. I used to be a genetic engineer hacking rats for a living to do cancer research before I pivoted to diplomacy. But I had a massive interest because my dad is an American who worked in the United Nations as a diplomat. So I think it kind of ran in my genes. So I pivoted to taking those exams, and there were 100,000 people who competed for about 100 spots, and here I was in 2004 inducted into the US Foreign Service. So I've been in the system for 22 years. And when I first started talking about H-1Bs openly, that was only when I was in sabbatical. So I had left the US government for a short period of time, and now I'm a veteran US diplomat. So in the last 22 years, my first gig was in a job. It was a flagship office of the State Department dealing with freezing the assets of terrorist organizations. So I was actually the person coordinating all the legwork that the interagency, the National Security Council, and the various agencies were doing to freeze the assets of terrorists around the world. So that included like everybody from Al Qaeda to groups like the Lord's Resistance Army to LTTE and beyond. Then my first overseas tour happened to be in India, where I did adjudicate 51,000 visas, which comprised everything from H-1Bs to the visitor visas like B-1s, B-2s, to essentially student visas, visas for athletes and celebrities and the like, the whole milieu. But most of the visas I concentrated on happened to be in the arena of non-immigrant visas, not necessarily the immigration pathway, but the non-immigrant visa pathway. And then I have also served in Qatar, Iraq, the United Kingdom, obviously, as a science diplomat for 3 years, Germany in Hamburg as the acting consul general. And then subsequently, I received the Tonga orders, and I was basically ready to leave as of last July, and then kind of went on this administrative leave and sabbatical subsequently. And so, after I went on sabbatical, I have had the opportunity to do a lot of work on what I observed for 20 years on the H-1B arena.
So what first led you to become interested in the immigration policies, and specifically the H-1B visa program?
That's a great question. So obviously, when I adjudicated the 51,000 visas in India between 2005 through 7, I had to learn basically the ins and outs of that very complex visa category. It's not a visa category that if you find fraud or if you find somebody any kind of wrongdoing, you cannot just deny the applicant because they come pre-approved by the Labor Department and as well as the Department of Homeland Security. So you have to go through what is sort of a legal pathway of revoking all of those visas. So, I don't know if you've ever been to a country where they ask you, how long are you going to stay and whatnot. And, you obviously
They
are
always
very
do, whichever country you go to.
I beg your pardon?
They always do, whichever country you go to.
Exactly, right. So unless you're part of the European Union, there's obviously this egregious process of entry into a country. And during that vetting process, the Customs and Border professional or officer has the right to say no, right? And it's an easy process. They're like, well, we deny you. Typically, for visa officers too, we are at the front line. We are America first. Our job is to protect our national security, and we've taken an oath to the Constitution to do that. So when you're denying, egregious fraud that you see, you just go, okay, well, sorry, you haven't presented us, your case, which makes sense that you would come back to your country of origin. So we're going to go ahead and deny you, easy peasy, with the student visas relatively harder, but for tourist visas, for business visas and whatnot. For H-1Bs, you cannot just deny them. There's a whole administrative processing that goes into play. And then after you're done with your 150 to 200 visa interviews, then you go back to your desk and you're having to write these sophisticated memos that would go back to the Department of Labor and the Homeland Security to actually revoke that visa. So it's a lot of extra work that not many officers are trained to do. And it's onerous because you also have the pressure of a burgeoning interest by many visitors to come to the United States. So you're seeing, a lobby full of people, whom, from every category and speaking different languages. So you kind of have to pick up on languages so you can read nuances and be able to.
Sounds very complicated to actually deal with it and the different departments that are actually involved. Before we go into all of that, maybe we should actually ask what exactly is the H-1B visa program, because I'm sure for many of our audience, this is just like a numbered thing that they don't know what it is. So I think if we clarify exactly what the program is first and what this visa is, then we go into it in more detail.
That's an excellent question, and it's a very great interview method to get to the baseline, right? So essentially, the H-1B visa is a temporary guest worker visa. It was culminated basically because there was a National Science Foundation study in the 1990s, which was flawed, but regardless, the study was presented to the Congress saying that the United States is going to have a shortage of STEM workers. STEM workers are science, technology, engineering, and math workers. And based on that very flawed study, the Congress went ahead and enacted a law to bring in, smart people who could not do things like computer engineering, to fill jobs in the United States in that arena. And so essentially, I have to say a lot of smart people came to the United States prior to this based on the needs of our economy between the 1950s and 1980s or 90s, right? Where they were the creme de la creme of a certain country. In this particular case, like a lot of, I'll be focusing a lot on India because 70% of the H-1Bs come from India. So I'll just say the creme de la creme of doctors, engineers, and lawyers came from India between that period of time, between the 1950s and 1990s. But later, the H-1B law was enacted by the Congress around like early 2000s. And essentially, I arrived in India 2005, around 2005, and it was kind of the visa mill for H-1B visas. So it's a guest worker visa that is required. It's temporary, meaning you come in, you do this very specialized job of, computer engineering, and then you depart. And the companies have to prove that they're not able to find American workers to do that gig. So they have to say, well, we went ahead and put all these ads and we waited for, 3 to 6 months and we were not able to get an American to fill the role of a computer engineer. So typically for H-1B visas, you know, we preferred people with masters in computer engineering, but bachelor's is fine as well. And that's not something that I saw on the visa line. Neither of those credentials were presented predominantly. So yeah, but I'm going to go ahead
And
and pivot to your next question.
how significant is the H-1B visa within the wider American immigration and visa system?
How frequently you said?
How significant?
How significant? It is a very significant visa because it is now part of massive debates, right? You have, when I was doing visas back in the day in India, I think it was like we were adjudicating about 100,000 visas per year in the consulate in Chennai. Chennai, which is formerly Madras, I'm sure the Brits know that as Madras, but it had the jurisdiction of Telangana, where Hyderabad is located, as well as Karnataka and Kerala, and then Tamil Nadu. So four contiguous states basically were part of our jurisdiction. But most of the H-1Bs came from Hyderabad or from Karnataka, Bangalore, and essentially, back then it was 100,000 people, and now, we're talking double that amount over the last 20 years. But in addition to that, they have, the H4s now have the authorization. So H4s are their spouses, male or female spouses who now have work authorization. And it has kind of become the backdoor entry to getting a green card expeditiously. But technically, those guest workers were supposed to return back home after doing those hard jobs, right? And it has become a bit of a loophole to bring in, everything
If
from
I'm to
lawyers.
understand this was a very specialist visa for people who had certain rare technical skills within, you said, computer industries. So
It was
it's not.
mainly for computer engineering, with the false belief by the National Science Foundation flawed study that we are lacking those people. So I'll just say the companies basically have to
That's the
put.
original purpose. So let's get that out of the way first, so we understand
Yes,
what
yes,
this
absolutely.
program was originally set up to apparently solve. Um, and so, who would also benefit if the program worked properly? Who would benefit most from that program? Would it be employers or workers or universities or the wider economy?
So basically, if it were truly a situation where you did not have enough STEM workers in the United States and the economy was not producing, or our universities were not producing enough computer engineering graduates, then the benefit would be for the company, for the companies, for also the economy in a way, because you have people working in STEM, which you don't have in your general populace, right? You don't have U.S. citizens uh, being pumped out of universities. But sadly, the truth of the matter is, even since 2005 timeframe, we had people being pumped out of our universities at a very strong level. I went to UCLA. which is a public university in California. It's kind of the creme de la creme of universities. It's based on merit and competence. And I did not touch computer engineering as an undergrad, even though I was a biotech engineer and, did molecular bio and all that lovely stuff. Computer engineering to me was hard. So, these kids who are going through the 4-year degree program, there are many being pumped out of our universities after having to burn the midnight oil, working, as at internships in order to get jobs in the U.S. economy. Plus, they have to incur a massive debt. We pay for our own universities and
very expensive in the
colleges. It's
US and
very
also here, yeah.
expensive. Unlike in the UK, where you do have that benefit of a government subsidized education. So
Even
we
so,
have
it's still very expensive. Many of our
exactly.
students leave university with huge debts, and yeah, obviously, there has been a lot of investment, I think, in both of our countries in this particular area and getting people to upskill. And the US, of course, is one of the world leaders when it comes to like Silicon Valley, big companies like Microsoft, Google, Apple. The world leaders in this area, and a lot of them with US citizens as well. So I mean, it's an interesting argument. And you were saying about the H-1B visa system, although this was the purpose that it was set up for, but you believe it wasn't actually being utilized in that way, don't you? This is the argument that you've made. It wasn't fulfilling that role that it was supposed to fulfill.
No, exactly. I mean, I got exposure of this right before joining the Foreign Service. I was doing an executive MBA at Pepperdine University, and right across from that campus was the Edison, campus, which is the Edison is our big electricity provider. And there were all these people crying in front of me as I was exiting my, uh, educational institution, which is Pepperdine. And you saw all these people with their like boxes crying. And, I met them in the elevator and they were basically like, complaining that they had to train Indian H-1Bs to do their jobs, and which they had done for 20 plus years. And it was thankless the way they were being booted out. And they were like, well, those H-1Bs are going to get the same amount of, salary as they were, but maybe not the benefits of like the medical and dental and 401k plan, et cetera. And that the
They were
company,
actually getting those people that were trained in the US citizens, to train up these H-1Bs and then
right,
sacking them.
and displacing them, exactly, and sacking them,
My
right? So
goodness, that's shocking.
right, that was shocking. So that kind of, I was very young. I was in my early 20s, and that really marked an impression in my head. That whole scene of like a lot of very sad, doleful people walking with their boxes, having to train these foreign workers who were temporary guest workers who were displacing them. And, as an American public servant, I've always been America first. I have 3 generations of family, that owes a debt to this country as much as the country owes a debt to, citizens like myself, who have worked hard. And so essentially, for American people, America should be there for them first. Our economy should be for our people first. And I'm sure as a UK citizen, you would agree with a similar, concept.
It's every country's government's role first to look after the security of the country, the borders, and also to look after the citizens.
Exactly.
Make sure not everything, but just make sure they're safe, make sure they have their opportunities, and then they're not unnecessarily endangered. This is part of the role of government.
Absolutely. You said it
And
well.
that's not to say that we shouldn't have international cooperation. I mean, between our two countries, we have amazing cooperation over decades with the,
Right.
you know, but I mean, at the same time, we have to look after our own citizens. And if we're giving opportunities to other people and sacking our citizens, that's a really crazy situation and totally unfair for people who have given so much for their country.
No, absolutely. And this is just one amongst 1,000 such cases. So when I was actually adjudicating these visas, I learned a lot about the whole process. And, so for 20 years, I didn't say anything. We did a lot of internal dissent memos, talking to our leadership about the fraud that we're seeing, that, a lot of companies are benefiting from cutting corners here and there, but they are not serving the American people. The fact that most of these computer engineers, and maybe because I was on the fraud line, like I would see 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 people present me fraudulent documents. And once I interrogated them about their skills in like SAP or Oracle or, Apache or Java, or whatever they claimed on their application. And this is the kind of skill set you need, when you have a computer engineering degree. And so I would have to do those interrogations and I would just ask them for very basic programming stuff, and they didn't have it. A lot of them were graphic designers and website people, people who hadn't gone through the egregious, a rather rigorous, right, process of, the heavy advanced calculus that you have to take. You have to take a ton of programming, courses. I have two sisters out of three who are computer programmers. So I've seen, how much sweat and blood goes into getting that degree. And so luckily, with that knowledge, I was able to train a lot of my fellow Foreign Service officers, but even my predecessors, who were the first to face H-1Bs, had also trained us well to look at these visas, with a very unique approach and ask the right questions. And so 20 years later, and throughout my 20 years, I've had a lot of whistleblowers call me. I never went to the press, because I basically, as a public servant, I'm a PD, public diplomacy and press officer by trade, but that's not something you do. It's not good protocol, like going and leaking information about what's happening to the press, because a lot of that was based on how the U.S. Government's leadership was being manipulated by their bilateral equivalents, and in this particular case in India, you had politicians go to our ambassador and say, well, the denial rate from Chennai is very high. You need to change that in order to strengthen our bilateral relationship. And so we had this really strange sort of predicament where our main job was to protect our borders, just like any customs and border protection official does, right? Like, manage the front line, and essentially protect our national security and our economic interests was kind of front and central in our minds. But then this other thing about this nuanced approach of making Indians feel good. The Indian politicians were putting a lot of pressure so that we would go ahead and issue. And then we would hear from Delhi, in Chennai, that, are you guys some rogue operatives? It's important that you say yes to every visa category that comes into play. It was a bit of a cognitive dissonance for us. We felt very, we know what the facts and the truth are. We cannot violate those terms, but then you have to make these Indian politicians happy because they're putting, or our bosses happy rather, because they're putting pressure on our bosses to adjudicate more visas. So
that sounds like a really crazy situation to be in, and you can't actually assess the visas on their own merits. And you were saying, like, even like the documents they were producing, so like these are supposedly their qualifications, were fraudulent in so many cases. My goodness. So how did you navigate that situation?
Well, I mean, it was difficult, right? Because you also have to pump out a lot of visas for your own performance metrics, like, because that all goes into your performance reviews. How fast are you adjudicating, but then you have to vet these as well. And then, some of my colleagues realized you're not getting extra brownie points for protecting our borders. So, like, let these H-1Bs go forward. It's a lot of extra work after hours to revoke each visa,
Yeah,
but
you mentioned, because also it wasn't just the State Department that was providing these visas, it was these other government departments that you have to check with before you could actually take a legal process. So of course, I mean, if you're a civil servant working as a diplomat in this sort of situation, and you've got to process, I don't know what your, like how many you had to process, but if you've got to process several thousand of these, it's like, then how are you going to be able to do all that work to manage that system? I mean, the easier option, I guess, for a lot of diplomats would be just simply to okay them, stamp them, put them through, and get their brownie points for doing their work, so to speak, in the fact that they've processed that many visas, rather than actually doing the checks that are needed in order to ensure that the right people get those visas and not the wrong ones. And of course, that's the other thing as well, because this was actually originally set up for people who were genuine, and there would be genuine cases, and maybe they won't get the visas because some other people get the visas that are not supposed to have them.
No, exactly. You're 100% right because I'll just start with like, the process was laden with so much fraud, but I wanted to prove the fraud. So I did make those trips to Hyderabad, which had this district called Amirpet, where they had all these fraudulent documents being produced, but there were other pockets of those documents being produced in other states. But this was kind of the epicenter. And I literally went from like, storefront to storefront, and, there were promises being made to applicants that they would get a green card within 6 months, if you apply for an H-1B, and we'll help you process this, yeah, H-1B application. And so it's an ecosystem that has been produced. There's a visa back industry. A lot of people benefit from it. I applaud the Indian authorities currently for having vetted some universities, which were very well-known universities like Manav Bharati University, for giving fake degrees to students that never actually studied at their university. But those are the kinds of things that I saw, and I put together along with my other colleagues, and it was all a huge team effort. We presented a massive case to New Delhi, saying this is why we really, are doing what we're doing is it's antithetical to our constitutional values or US values of rule of law, right? And so, but all of that was being, uh, we faced a lot of backlash, unfortunately. So, but I stayed quiet for the last 20 years.
So you were actually doing your job to
I was
ensure
right,
that this was all investigated and the
right.
right people got the visas and the wrong ones didn't, and then you faced the backlash.
And I faced the backlash, so when I did go on sabbatical, I, had the privilege of working very closely with the Center for Immigration Studies, which is a leading think tank in the United States that cares about legal immigration. And they, sought my expertise on this issue. But, a lot of whistleblowers have come up to me within the last 20 years, like showcasing their concerns about the H-1B visa, basically displacing them and whatnot. And I didn't know what to do with all that information. And I just thought, hey, this is the optimal time to chat with CIS. And they did a podcast. And I really thought maybe 500 fuddy-duddy people in Washington would listen to that podcast, and, or maybe some makers and the like. But the Indian press picked that, and it had 1.2 billion eyeballs overnight. And then, a YouTuber, Tyler Oliveira, wanted to basically message to the general public, the American people, how in sort of in Gen Z speak, like how problematic this whole issue is. So he collaborated with me. So did Dallas Express, which is a news agency. But I have faced, unfortunately, a lot of hate for doing my job. Um, Obviously people will go straight to the fact that, I'm a Muslim. American Muslim, but I'm an American first Muslim. I don't care if you're Muhammad, you're Patel, you're Rinky Tinky, or you're Aaron or Jacob, right? Like I'm going to be an equal opportunity anti-fraud officer. And that's how I, basically I've led my life with a very sort of egalitarian approach to supporting the truth and advancing the truth and basically curbing anything that violates the rule of law. And
I think that's the point
unfortunately,
that people are missing, because one of my friends in India, when she saw that I was interviewing you, said, "Oh, but she doesn't like Indian immigration to the US, does she?" And I said, "It's not about that. I said it's about fairness, about making sure that the right people actually get the visas that they're supposed to get, and other people who are committing fraud don't." I said, "There's the principle of fairness here and the rule of law." And I said, "That's what we're going to be talking about." And they said, "Oh, well, in that case, that's not wrong. You know, good for her."
I really appreciate your kind gesture in supporting me and helping me get the truth out as well. Obviously, there's a lot of flack against me saying, well, she's Indian origin. I have Indian ethnicity, but I'm American, and I also have European ethnicity. And it doesn't really matter where you're from. Like you could be, I could name all the countries of South Asia, like, Pakistani, Sri Lankan, Bangladeshi, Nepali. Or broader than that, you could be from Finland, you could be from Sweden, you could be from the United Kingdom. If you're committing fraud, I'm going to go after you. Not in my current role. I'm basically a veteran, diplomat. But in the past, I was just doing the job of any kind of law enforcement. We were not necessarily law enforcement, we US diplomats, but the idea is to basically coalesce with the law enforcement people. So I work very closely with the FBI and the broader Department of Justice, to enforce against these wrongs. And they were part and parcel of our investigations. And that's something I think a lot of the Indian public gets wrong is we're doing these things kind of unilaterally. These decisions are made in unison with law enforcement, in order to curb fraud. So.
Yeah, and I think this is the other thing as well. I mean, I'm sure if there was an influx of people to India that were coming from Vietnam or somewhere else and exploiting the Indian visa system in a similar way, then there
Right.
would be a similar complaint from people within India. And
A
there'd
hundred
be the
percent.
people working within the diplomatic services there that would also be upset about the situation. Um,
That's
every
the
country would.
fantastic point.
Yeah.
And there is no reciprocity either, right? I mean, like for instance, if there were hordes of Americans going to India to do similar work, whatever gaps in their employment industry are, um, India does not give us the same reciprocity, and many countries don't. I'm not just going to like talk about India here, but 70% of the H-1Bs come from India. My main, sort of justification for all this is like, we have enough US grads in the STEM arenas, like 400,000 per annum being pumped out of our top universities, and they're not able to find jobs. Some of them have to drive an Uber, some are making crepes in a mall, some are doing Amazon delivery grocery deliveries because they're not able to find jobs because there is nepotistic hiring that's taking place in the IT industry. They are hiring their own kind because there's honor among thieves. I hate to put it this way, and I'm
Is
not
there on it on things?
or let's just say there's like an arrangement that has been done where people of the same like-minded approach to things where bribery is okay, that kind of mentality. And I'm not just blaming sort of the Indian diaspora, H-1B diaspora, but broader than that, some cultures are okay with nepotistic hiring, and ours is a system based on merit and competence. And it's not what you look like, it's how you can perform at a certain job that matters. But unfortunately, that's not the case. Americans are having to hire people to replace them just because they are, being discriminated against at the workplace. And it's basic nickel and diming that is happening from the IT industry, but you also have a burgeoning IT lobby that has influenced our lawmakers for many, many years. So I really feel, you know, it was an honor to work with CIS because I think I'm finally feeling satiated that we could work together to highlight the the crazy amount of fraud that our system has faced, that the American public has been talking about this forever. And it was, a moment of pride to actually voice their opinion, because my voice matters. Having served in Chennai and having watched this arena for the last 20 years, and only seeing the um ballooning fraud explode to this level, I just feel that, CIS and I were able to puncture the halo effect that these are the best and the brightest that are coming from India or China or elsewhere. And that halo effect was a disinformation campaign against American workers, and pumping up Indians, Chinese, other guest workers. So just kind of wanted to put that
Of course,
out
this
there.
is one thing that, I mean, the supporters of this program will argue that America needs access to the world's best talent. And, how do you respond to that argument? Because I'm sure there are actually genuinely talented people that must have come into the US on these visas as well. But how do you balance that as well between like the people that are like genuine and the existence of this program? Or does that program need to be like reformed in some way, or should it be stopped, or what's the solution for this?
You're right. There are many, many genuine, best and the brightest types, which have come through the O1 visa program. There were several H1Bs that, I would say numerous, that were legitimate. But unfortunately, the kind of fraud that I've seen, but I happen to be also on the fraud line, so I saw stuff that was referred to me. They were already determined to be fraudulent, and I would see like 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, so 80 to 90% of them were fraudulent. And this was also in the F1, which is a student visa category. They brought a lot of fake documents, including fake degrees. As well as the J1s, which are exchange program people, also a lot of fake ones there.
I've
And
heard also in the UK, it's coming to our news about student visas that were fake, or people coming to universities that were not like really proper universities, that were
right.
set up in order to cater for these people. And obviously they were making money from it. But like those universities that were set up, or educational establishments for this, but they were really coming in as workers that were going to work in chicken factories and places like this, rather than actually, in whatever they were supposed to be studying.
Yes, and that's happening in the United States too, where they come in to the H1B route, and they're running a food cart somewhere, or a grocery store, pizzeria, or whatever,
Mm.
and we've seen that. But sort of going back to your previous question, yes, there were people who were sort of the creme de la creme that came through the O1 visa category, that I can't point to which industry or which company they landed in, but there is that route, right? But that too has been tainted, sadly. Like a lot of the some people have claimed that there are like some geniuses, and they have manipulated the poor visa officers, and they were actually not necessarily. They were sort of the run-of-the-mill types. So there's fraud literally leaking in through every visa category. So and then there is this halo effect that needs to be punctured, that these are the best and the brightest, when you do have top students coming out of US universities who are not able to find the opportunity. So it's a very tough balance,
And that's
and
something we face in the UK as well. We've had people coming out of universities that are in a lot of debt because it's
right.
expensive to study, and then they come out and they have to take far more mundane jobs than what they've become qualified for. And they struggle. And
So
it's a shame,
sorry.
like when they're struggling, when you've got the people that come into the country and manage to get good jobs. It creates
Yeah.
tension between the communities in the UK as well, which is also not good for the immigrant communities. And I'm sure that's true also in the US.
Right. I mean, we we had a whole wave of the creme de la creme, show up to the United States between the 1950s through the 90s, right? Where you from every country, there were, top doctors, lawyers, engineers. Like I would love to go to those Indian doctors from the past. Now they are, septuagenarians and octogenarians, but they were very smart people, and they are very smart people. Unfortunately, they're retiring, and then I would be very, very scared going to any South Asian doctor now. And I'm not trying to frame or any other doctor who comes with a fraudulent degree certificate from their country, but they claim to be, top notch. Because I served in India, I could tell that from a very factual perspective. And I had a lot of Indian friends in the Madras club arena and beyond who said there
But I
were
think this
easy,
is the point. It's not about who they are in terms
right,
of, whether they're Indian or Pakistani, Vietnamese, Chinese, whatever. I
right,
mean, it's whether they're actually qualified or not. I mean, if you're going
a
to a
hundred
doctor,
percent,
then you
right.
definitely want that doctor to be qualified in medicine. Otherwise, what on earth's going to happen to you? And it's similar for other things which are so vital that you have the
Right.
person is qualified for what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, I mean, you would be petrified going to a physician whom you later realize had paid in his or her own home country to get into the medical university or system. And, because there is that system of, in India, they had something called the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe. So if you belong to a certain, um, you know, a, a lower protected class of people. I wouldn't call it a lower class or caste myself. This is how it was framed. These people were basically from a certain caste that were from an underserved group, and yes, they do deserve, extra brownie points in some parts because they've been through a very difficult lifestyle. But however, economic deprivation should not be given brownie points to the point that they would get into a medical university with 40% in math and science. And then suddenly you see them at the visa line, then they have a medical degree from India. And I'm like, well, I would be very, very petrified if you were operating on me, like, any kind of surgery or what have you. And some of them were surgeons and they got jobs in the United States. And I denied a lot of those types, but not every officer did. Then you have the other type where you come from a very wealthy family, from upper caste, and you failed all your exams, but your parents can buy you a seat for like 40 lakh rupees, and I'm sure this happens broader than in India. Like it may be happening in South Asia, it may be happening in, other parts of the world, like, as you mentioned, Vietnam or what have you.
Of course,
But
you served
but
in India, so that's the reason why you're referenced.
exactly. And so I'm
It's not
speaking from a
specifically
factual
about Indians. Yeah.
perspective of having been there, being surrounded by Indians, Indian friends who would tell me exactly how the system works. So I had done a very holistic research and very intrinsic research of the landscape before making my visa adjudication decisions. And then I trained the other Foreign Service officers, the consular officers as well. And based on this very factual, science and math based statistics that I saw, I have made the determination that we have to be very, very careful, and in basically not just the visa adjudication process, but in framing people as the best and the brightest, because that halo effect has affected a lot of lawmakers who've not been on the visa front lines like I have. And so they are, out there being very subservient to the IT lobby and are willing to open the doors for H-1Bs, J-1s, F-1s, and whatnot without any sort of stringencies. And we have to be America first writ large. So.
Do you think the problem is the existence of this visa program, or do you think it is the way it's being administered?
That's an excellent question. I mean, the visa program was based on a flawed study by the National Science Foundation. As I mentioned, it was later debunked, but laws were put into play to create this H-1B, visa category, and I think everybody forgot about the NSF study. But how this is also being administered is, it has become very politicized, unfortunately. And so, people like myself, consular officers, are trying to do the right thing. We've all taken an oath to the Constitution to advance American interests, national security, economic interests, a foreign policy, defense interests, what have you. And at the front lines, you're just trying to do your job. But then you have these political bigwigs from, India or whichever country you're serving in, basically influence our ambassadors. And some of those ambassadors are political appointees or what have you. And then the pressure comes from the embassies, chief of mission, the leadership, and once it comes from there, we are a very hierarchical organization, and it worries a minion of a visa officer, where technically the law protects us, where our adjudication and our decisions are not meant to be manipulated, which is good, which is a good system. But yet, that the politics still come into play, and your visa officer chief, the consular chief may put pressure on you saying, hey, the ambassador's scolding me because you're rejecting too many people. Like, please change that. And you're having to think about, oh my gosh, my performance review is going to be affected. I do need to get promoted and get ahead. And why should I care about this small battle? But I need to think about my bigger career trajectory. So there's that.
Do you think it's more to do with not necessarily the existence of the program itself, but it's more to do with these power pressures between ambassadors and workers on the front line, and also what happens on the bilateral level between powerful politicians in the US and also India and other countries?
It's a whole ecosystem, right? A lot of training needs to happen at the Department of
if
Homeland
those
Security.
pressures were not placed on, like when you were a visa worker on the front line and you could actually do your job,
Right.
then it's not necessarily the existence of the program in that case, then is it? It's these other pressures that are coming into play, which are actually ironically illegal, within American law, I guess, because that's not actually fulfilling the purpose of what the visa is. People are being made to sign off those visas who are working within the embassies, even though those people are not entitled to those visas.
Absolutely. There's that pressure campaign that goes against us, right? And it's remarkable the hubris that these people come with. Like they would be very afraid of, say, the Customs and Border Protection official because they're in a uniform and they carry weapons, but they're not afraid of people like myself and others, who are at the front line. So it's very disrespectful that they would bring all these fraudulent documents and try to game the system, and not realizing that we're part and parcel of the same, network of US government officials. And before I get any further, I forgot to mention the big caveat that I'm speaking from my personal perspective as a Foreign Service officer for 22 years. Now I'm a veteran diplomat, and not speaking on behalf of the Department of State or any other entity. And I'm sorry that I was remiss in mentioning that. But you're right that there is it's a multi-pronged ecosystem that is really there are many remedies that need to be made before we go any further. And I feel like President Trump was making the right moves by attaching $100,000 fee for new H-1B applications. And that was basically a really great measure to tighten up the program. Unfortunately, it has been questioned by the judiciary system. Judge Sorokin basically went ahead and punctured the idea, but I hope and pray that we are able to appeal that. And by we, I just mean, on behalf of the American people, I hope President Trump is able to resuscitate that $100,000 fee because it was critical in creating those checks and balances that have gone unabated all this time. So
you did actually mention already that you are retired and no longer in this role. So I hope our viewers understood that. But nonetheless, I mean, you have an immense amount of experience in this role on the front line of the diplomatic service. What do you think is the way forward with this? So, I mean, it's like if that's $100,000, I mean, that's a good idea, actually. But who would pay that, though? Would that be paid by the companies that are sponsoring the visa applicants? Okay.
right. So it is paid by the company, because that way they will have proven that they went through the US system and they were not able to find an American to do the job, right? Be it a new undergrad trained in AI, or someone who's a seasoned, computer programming professional. They've done their due diligence. They looked into the labor market and they were not able to find someone to do that job. So thus they had to tack on that $100,000 fee for new applicants. But that's something, that has been punctured. And we hope, we meaning the American people, are hoping that gets reinstated, the idea of that fee, because again, it has been a floodgate, or I would call it a visa, racketing campaign for the last 20 years that I've seen it. And, I really believe that something very big and bold needed to happen to change the system. And I feel that the Trump administration is making those measures happen in a very, assertive manner.
Are there any other measures that have been put in place to tackle this visa fraud, both the H-1B and also other visa fraud?
When I and my other colleagues between 2005 through 7, were tackling H-1B fraud, or F-1 or J-1, or the student visas and exchange program visas and whatnot, and L-1s, which are another, very leaky, similar to H-1Bs, but they are for workers as well. It's a worker visa category, and that could be manipulated as well. You have to be a manager in order to get that visa, and you could pretend to be a manager at an IT industry entity and get that visa. So anyway, so basically. The measures that are being put in play is that, back in the day, we had to create the system, the processes to curb visa fraud. But I think the template that my predecessors, my cohort, and some others created have been, leveraged by successor generations. They are doing a great job of, implementing some of the measures. But what I hear anecdotally is that the fraud continues, that they don't have enough support to vet the floodgates of applicants. And they have some of my colleagues who are currently serving in these posts, have conveyed to the leadership the concerns that they see. They've written cables to the department in form of dissent cables saying this needs to change. But they don't necessarily have the support to hinder the fraud.
So it's more of the same at the moment. It doesn't seem to be changing.
Right. And so if you wonder why I went to CIS, or CIS came to me, and why we collaborated, this is the Center for Immigration Studies, is that I felt, okay, I'm on a sabbatical. I've seen this wrong happen against my country for the last 20 years. It was literally my 20th year anniversary, and it just kind of magically worked that I could speak about this issue very boldly and very factually, which was kind of on behalf, I was carrying the water on behalf of my colleagues in India, and beyond, and other posts who are facing similar issues, but are not able to challenge the systemic concerns. So
I think that's the key issue, isn't it? It's systemic. It's not the fact that there's always going to be, I guess, some visa fraud, but there's actually a systemic process there where you've got all these different companies and setups and whatever that are actually all making money from this and churning out these fake documents, tutoring people how to get their visas and stuff, and also exploiting these people as well, because even though they
Right.
are people that are getting these, they're actually being told by these shops in, not just in India, but in various countries, this is what you do if you want this visa. This is how you get to the US. We can get you there, but you have to pay this much money. You have to do this. You have to have these fraudulent documents. You have to, maybe they wouldn't even started with that if, they hadn't been told. So that all of this is actually making the whole process much more corrupt and fraudulent and criminal.
Yeah, and you're 100% right. I mean, you just have to follow the money, right? Like there are a lot of parties that are being benefited. You have the visa brokers, you have, even at the IT company level, you have a hiring manager who's like, hey, you're making 10,000 a month, give me 2,000 every month and I'll stay quiet. You actually don't know how to do, C++ programming, but I'm happy to keep quiet about it and get you to hire an Indian guy who's from IIT Madras or IIT Chennai. You can go ping him and get him to do all the work for cheap, and then you could just be the face of that work back in San Francisco or what have you. So there's that that's going on, and I'm really grateful that my time doing consular work was limited to 51,000 visas or just 2 years, because the joke of the day was, it makes a man out of you. But I think the emotional intelligence that comes out of doing visas, you know, but that emotional intelligence that women possess, like actually is very, very key to culling that fraud. And I was able to, figure out that there were, certain locally employed staff who were part of these fraud rings, that there were local politicians who actually owned the visa back industry. And so it was very detrimental to their gravy train when someone like me, eradicated their visa fraud mill. And I think that broader, the online hate that I'm receiving and hate from, entities like NDTV and others, they're trying to dilute the work of visa officers like myself. Yes, it was 20 years ago that I admittedly saw this fraud, but it has only ballooned and exploded, where I anecdotally hear from my colleagues that nothing has happened. And the American public is, if you go on X, Twitter, and others, there's a lot of people voicing their concerns. They have shared their stories, and it's literally been going to deaf ears. And so I'm grateful that, the time that I did the visas was limited, because it would have like made me I don't know, I may have been emaciated. Maybe that would have been good, but it was a tough experience. I've obviously done a lot of other things, including negotiating the Diego Garcia Treaty, and, helped with the cleanup of the Novichok situation, and also negotiated the US-UK Science and Technology Treaty, which helped advance our shared interests in artificial intelligence, machine learning, emerging tech, and synthetic bio. But across the board in the last 20 years, I've done many things on behalf of the US government, but this thing, the H-1B part of it, had been killing me mentally for not being able to speak truth to power publicly. And so I was very privileged when I got the chance to do that last November. And also now, and then there are people like you who are helping me, amplify the concerns, and I'm not going to be pummeled by the online hate. And I just wanted to go on the record and say, like, it has nothing to do with a country of 1.5 billion plus people. India has amazing people. I respect all the cultures, respect all the religions. It's just a sliver of the H-1B public that has unfortunately tainted the image of all Indians, which is very unfortunate, because that was not my doing. I'm actually voicing concerns against that, rampant hate. And it's unjustifiable. But what I can say, why the American public is and the online American public is showing a lot of hate is because they have gone to the right, lawmakers. They have tried to voice their opinions, but they're very frustrated that there have been no changes until perhaps now. So,
Thank you for doing that as well, because I'm sure a lot of people would not be aware of this at all. One thing that may actually impact this in some way, and whether it actually decreases or increases it, I'm not sure. Maybe you have some insights on this, is the advance of AI over the past 5 to 10 years. AI has reached to a point now where it is actually doing many things which it was unable to do previously. So what do you think, how do you think that's going to impact upon this H-1B visa system and the fraud as well?
So basically, I guess I'm the right person and the wrong person to ask this question of. So I was one of the first people in the US government who spoke about how AI could help protect our international security. I worked on Mosul Dam issues, and I did these crazy, advanced calculus calculations to apprise the US government that this is a breachable dam when ISIS was there. And I wish I had AI as a friend to help with those calculations because, it was a very petrifying sort of situation. So I have spoken publicly about how AI could help, like with nuclear security issues at the Atoms for Peace conference in Vienna, and I was one of the first diplomats to, speak at the AI 4 summit in Las Vegas. And my whole thesis at the Marine Command and Staff College, which is basically a war college in Quantico, where the Marines get trained. I wrote my honors thesis on how AI could have curbed the rise of ISIS, right? That said, I've also written an article in the Foreign Service Journal, which got published last month, which says that AI cannot replace diplomats. Like, AI should assist, but it should not replace American diplomats. I say
I
that
wasn't thinking so much in that kind of angle, although I mean I can
right,
see what you're saying with that, that it can be a tool for some of these things. But because a lot of these H1Bs are technological jobs within the
right.
computer industry, so how do you think, is it likely to increase because there's more people that are needed to develop AI, or is it likely to decrease because there'll be less need of some of these positions because of AI? This is the angle that I was actually thinking on. What do you
Got
think?
it. Got it. Okay. So thank you. Thank you for articulating that. Well, I personally think, yes, I mean, what the American worker, the IT worker is seeing is a lot of layoffs in the IT industry right now because of AI. But what they're also seeing is that concurrently with that, they are bringing in, they meaning the IT bosses are bringing in a lot of H-1Bs while they're firing American workers, despite the AI, sort of surge. And so, at least that's what I'm seeing anecdotally on X Twitter. I haven't necessarily. I spoke to about 3 or 4 people, who are in leadership positions in the IT industry, actually, who did say that there are these mass layoffs. They've actually seen, some H-1Bs use AI to do their jobs as well. Like, like they would put in the programming code, or they would get the correct code from AI by just sort of, punching it in. I personally haven't worked those mechanics, so I can say with great assurance that, this is how AI was being used. But I am aware that there are mass layoffs in the IT industry because of AI. And yet you see a burgeoning demand for H-1B still. And that is a double whammy for American workers. You have AI on one hand, and then you have H-1Bs still coming in, to do their jobs. And it's a bit of a,
No,
tough
that's
situation.
actually something which is kind of concerning as well, because
Yeah,
if some of these people are coming in to do these jobs and they're using AI to do that coding, but they themselves don't know how to code, then they can't check the code. I mean, it's fine to use AI as a tool for this, And if you know
Right.
what you're doing and you can check it, so you can actually generate the code, go through it, make sure it's correct. But if you don't know, and then you just use that code in some
Right.
application, these apps, I mean, they deal with our banking details, our personal details, our addresses, our relationships, all sorts of things.
Right.
If there's wrong code in there that could actually cause that information to be leaked, there are tremendous security issues involved in
Oh,
that.
absolutely. And that's a case that I made in
And so
my
your
article.
analogy to a doctor is quite interesting because it is, similar to like a doctor. You need someone who's capable in that role that can make sure that there aren't these security leaks.
100%. I mean, I personally have used AI to determine, like, if I ate a certain kind of food, like, am I, I'm trying to do this elimination diet. Like, am I allergic to garlic or am I allergic to, red peppers? Like, what is it? AI, can you help me understand, like, what these symptoms were? But that doesn't mean I'm going to replace my regular physician. That would be stupid. And I think, with diplomacy, that's the case that I made at the Foreign Service Journal level, where I said, you need that emotional intelligence of diplomats to be able to understand fraud. AI is robotic. It will make a black or white decision, but it won't understand the nuances. You kind of need that human intelligence to
But
to
imagine if I've got like a banking app on my phone, and it
right,
was it was created by people who have come in on dodgy visas, and they're not qualified to do the coding. They've done the coding, and I'm using that banking app, not realizing that my details are going abroad to somewhere else. They're going to be used.
right,
People could lose everything. I mean,
right.
it's quite serious
No,
when
that's
you've
a
got the
massive
unqualified
concern.
people, because everything now is technologically based.
You're 100% right. And I have done a lot of work on, basically puncturing the idea of, Chinese 6G or 5G, Huawei and others because of this concern called kill switch, where a certain entity, maybe who doesn't have the same rule of law, mentality, may just take all your data and just go kill, kill your access to it. And that's the concern. Actually, a few whistleblowers did come back to me after the CIS conversation, and have emailed me saying, when can we collaborate? Because, I don't want to name the banks they mentioned, but these are big banks in the US. And they said, well, they possess all the data, but these people are sitting in India or another country. And we're very concerned that they own all this information. So say they're going overseas for a trip and suddenly there's, because of security protections, you no longer have access to your credit or debit card and you're trying to, like, desperately call. And, one person whom I spoke with, she said she faced a situation where that company just wouldn't let her use her debit card, and they were sitting in Bangalore, and she called it like a different, transnational repression. She used a certain term. I don't exactly remember it, but the ownership of your own data could be in the hands of people who are not of the same value system. They don't really care. They're also out of your law enforcement jurisdiction. And there is that I mean, you brought up an excellent question regarding cybersecurity concerns, leaking of data, and your dignity as a human being to own your own identity equities, and so I think
You know,
that's something that is very concerning.
No, it certainly is. And I mean, it's one of those things. It's ironically, it's come up in the UK recently in our news, and our politicians talking about the fact that a lot of our reliance is on American companies. But I'm
Right.
less concerned about the reliance on American companies because you have very similar rule of law basis systems, principles to what we have in
Exactly.
the UK. So at least I have recourse to law. But the thing
Yes.
is, what do I do if it's in the hands of someone in some developing country that doesn't have strong rule of law?
Yeah.
What do I do? I mean, that's actually far more worrying, and almost no one's talking about that here, and I guess in the US as well.
No, I mean, you brought up that $64 million question, that needs to be explored further. I made the case that, our State Department system, and again, speaking on a very personal basis, we while we were working on open source, meaning unclassified stuff, if you're putting stuff in the chat GPT kind of portal inside the State Department, you're still your diplomatic thinking is all there. And the portal that is basically being controlled by an entity, a third party company, a vendor, which is also supplying to many foreign governments, it's a very thin veneer which could be penetrated easily, and they could leak and leach all our information while we know it's all unclassified. And, it's unfortunate that our innocence and naivety is slightly being manipulated by a lot of these big companies who feel like, they need to control, our daily lives and how we function. And it's hard to escape the sort of reliance on electronics and AI and other similar systems, because that's kind of become our way of life. But I certainly made that
It's pretty
case
much
for the State
impossible at this
Department,
stage because they come into literally everything. If you want to live a productive life and be plugged
right?
into the world, you have to use technology. You can't escape these things anymore.
And I know privacy is a very big thing for the Brits and for Europeans as well, right? Like when I
Mm.
was there, when the UK was still part of the EU, but you still have the same mentality, the privacy shield, the data protections, and whatnot. I was very impressed with that approach, where basically there's this privileged status for citizens and humans who are functioning in those arenas where your data should be protected. And I feel that yes, you raise a very, very big point here, which needs to be explored further. What are the losses that Americans, Europeans, British citizens have incurred, because of these third-party companies controlling our data, and then they're sitting in, any part of the world for all you know.
If you could change something about the system, what kind of reforms, if you had that opportunity, would you actually change?
That's an excellent question, and I guess I'm not in the right sort of position to talk about it necessarily. But I'll give my 2 cents. If you were to talk about the H-1B system, I mean, I have basically, you know, with justification, showcase the idea that a lot of American people are also supporting or supportive of, is to, do a full review of the H-1B system and just stop the H-1B processing and applications until that full review has been conducted, and then just, figure out whether we actually really do need H-1Bs, and L1s and J1s, and also the big pipeline of fraud is the F1 arena, the student visa arena as well. And the students here, the foreign students, are privileged to get into this program called the OPT program. And OPT program is basically like training after, it's an internship program after you're done with your 4-year degree. And most of the foreign students really benefit from this because they jump into OPT and then they get sashayed straight into the H-1B pipeline without question. So they get the first dibs on every job in the IT sector. I would love to nix the OPT program if I had a magic wand. And that's an easy executive order that the president's office can execute to get rid of the OPT program, because that is perhaps the Achilles heel that is allowing students to jump into H-1B jobs while pushing against American students and workers.
Yeah, given your unique sort of perspective on this, as someone who's been on the front lines, you know about the immigration system and stuff. What are your thoughts on how a successful, fair, and sustainable immigration system would look?
I mean, there is no utopia out there, but I've been to many, many countries where, I feel you follow better practices or best practices. Even the UK, I think, is a lot more careful about, whom you admit into the UK, and how long they should stay and whatnot. But, I feel that our immigration system has been manipulated so heavily because we don't have an exit control system, right? We don't necessarily, like I have seen, so I was working in Qatar and I would hear about all these cases of they would be like, okay, so again, not against any country, but these kids were from Egypt, right? So you went on an exchange program. So imagine, you know, so when I was in Qatar, I remember meeting this US Foreign Service officer who was working in Egypt, and they were like, we tend to get in a lot of trouble when we do these exchange programs because these Egyptians who go on our exchange programs never return back because there's no exit control, meaning like, once they get the visa, they're in, they come for this exchange program in the United States, and then they're just, hiding in the system. They become elusive, right? And they find a friend, a relative, or whatever, and they never return back. And they come on the U.S. government dime, through the privilege, which is paid by the American taxpayer, through the privilege of the U.S. government. You're chosen for an international visitor leadership program, or a YES student program, which is youth exchange program, and what have you. There's many routes to that. And their intention is never to return back to their home country after the US government and the American people have given them that respect and honor of coming here and cherry picking them or hand selecting them from the rest of the populace that we deal with. So basically, that's sort of the issue that I'm having to, uh, I've had to face, well, not in Qatar necessarily, because the Qataris, very much abided by the law. It was very hard for me to actually recruit them to come on exchange programs. But if there were any Egyptians that we were selecting, because Qatar has such a small population, I was advised by our US embassy in Egypt that be careful when you select Egyptian applicants, they may never return back to the home country, that sort of thing, if that makes sense.
It's a shame when people abuse the system like that, because I mean, I can say as someone who's been on an IVLP, what a wonderful opportunity it was and how I benefited from that. But
and you were the
I
creme de la
didn't.
creme of IVLPs, and we need more people like you because, you've really helped in strengthening our bilateral relationship, our transatlantic relationship, and advanced, shared interests, which means a lot. So
And I hope to do more in that vein.
you should.
Thank you.
You're a good
Well, thank you
ambassador for the United Kingdom.
thank you, Mahvash. And thank you. I think you were actually one of the people who recommended me for that as well, going back. So thank you. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. That was my privilege and honor.
Well, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for highlighting this about the H-1B visa system and helping us to understand it and how it's been exploited, and your insights on fairness, innovation, and national competitiveness. Whatever one's perspective, it's clear that some of these issues are going to remain both in the United States and other countries around the world, but we certainly hope that our governments will get a handle on them and implement better policies and ensure that there is more fairness within our systems, because unfairness is something that, even if it doesn't immediately affect everyone, ultimately it does impact everyone eventually. Once you get unfairness filtered through a system, you lose that kind of, how everybody's treated is not being treated in the right way, and they're not getting the opportunities they want. They're losing things. They're not in a good situation, and that's not to the benefit of anyone. If you get too many people come from one country to another country on an unfair visa system, and they're taking jobs from the local people, and it creates tensions between communities. If it's done fairly, people can at least say, okay, well, at least people followed the system, and they have a right to be here. But when it's exploited and people know that there's unfairness there, it creates a lot of resentment and anger. And that then also negatively impacts those immigrant communities themselves, including those that have done nothing wrong and followed the system. So, I mean, I'm really glad that you have highlighted this and that you're drawing attention to it. And I hope people can understand that this is well intentioned and that you're trying to improve things for everyone.
Well, thank you so much for the honor and privilege of giving me this opportunity to be here to talk about the H-1B visas and beyond. This is a fantastic collaboration, and your questions were very, I would call them in the $64 million category. So thank you for that, and thank you for all the interfaith work you're doing as well. That changing of hearts and minds for the bettering of the world is impressive. So I salute what you do.
Thank you, Mahvash. It's been an absolute pleasure. And to all of our viewers, thank you for tuning in and joining us. If you like my content, then please do like and subscribe to the channel and to the videos. And also there is a Buy Me a Coffee link. If you can sponsor and support that, that will help me to focus on producing more great content. Thank you all for your time today.